Jessica here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm showing you a card I made for a few challenges. To see more information on those, just go to my blog. The link is in the description below. I'm using two colors of Distress Oxide inks in Picked Raspberry and Worn Lipstick to tint some texture paste. One of the challenges I'm participating in this week is the Color Throwdown Challenge, and the colors are pink, craft, and gray. The Picked Raspberry color is a very vibrant shade of pink, and I wanted it a bit softer, which is why I mixed it with the Worn Lipstick color. I just love that name, Worn Lipstick. I'm a lipstick girl though. I'm using a fireworks stencil from a Simon's Stamp monthly kit to make the pattern of texture paste on the front of this A2 sized Nina Storm panel. Unfortunately, this stencil is discontinued, but almost any stencil you have in your supplies will achieve a similar look. After I laid down as much of the texture paste as I wanted, I peeled up the washi tape that is holding the cardstock panel down and set it aside to dry. It does take some time to fully dry. I washed off my mat and palette knife immediately and started on the focal point, which is this cute little bunny from the Simon's Stamp Cuddly Critters stamp set. I stamped it twice using the stamp platform. My intense black ink pad is drying up and doesn't stamp as well as a new one. It has been heavily used and is my favorite for Copic coloring and stamping in general, as long as it's not watercolors. Even though it is well loved, I still get some use out of it using the stamp platform. I'm using the Copic sketch markers to color in the bunny image. I'm putting the markers in this fantastic mug that my nieces gave me for my birthday. It just makes me smile every time I see it, and I'm leaving it here in my studio so I can enjoy it every day. I'm using the C7 Copic marker to color a scrap piece of Nina Solar White cardstock. This is an easy way to color your paper so that it matches without having to buy a whole sheet or a pack of paper. Don't worry about the ink that is getting onto the stamp platform. It is easily cleaned up with some rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol has quickly become a staple product in my creative process. I use it with alcohol inks to clean many surfaces and also the barrel on Copic markers. I will link to the post showing how I do Copic marker maintenance in the description below. I'm using a white embossing powder and the Lawn Fawn stamp Hobby Easter to create the sentiment. Before I stamp the words, I prep my paper with the embossing buddy so that the embossing powder does not cling to any areas I don't want. Then I stamp it with the Versamark ink and sprinkle embossing powder over it. This is a coffee filter that I'm using to help contain the embossing powder. It makes it easy to dump the embossing powder back into its container after I'm done. I used to use a scrap piece of paper, but this is cleaner and coffee filters are pretty cheap. I also can use them more than once. Now that all the stamping is done, I can focus on the coloring. I have my Copic sketch markers in C1, C5, C7, RV11, and E43, plus the colorist blender. I'm starting with the darkest C marker first and coloring where the shadows of the bunny would be. Any layers that overlap, like underneath the arms, there will be a shadow, and the folds of the ears. Then using the C5 marker, I blend the darker shade out. I don't have a marker between C5 or C1, and that is quite a jump in shade. So I'm using the tip-to-tip technique and taking the C1 marker to the tip of the C5 marker to make a medium shade between the two. That way my blending is more cohesive. This does not affect your marker as long as you make sure to rub out any excessive color onto a piece of paper. When I'm done with that, I use just the lightest color, C1, to blend out everything and finish coloring in the ears, arms, and feet of the bunny. I wanted a bit more shading, so I go back to using the tip-to-tip technique and shade more of the ears and around the head. Then I use the RV11 to color inside the ears, feet, pads, and lay down a little color to the cheeks. I'm shading as if my light source is coming from above the bunny's head. Though I use that as a reference on where to shade, I don't worry too much about it. I like to do just simple coloring for cards, but I think shading just adds a bit of depth to the image and makes it stand out more. There are a lot of alternatives to Copic markers. I've tried a few from Dick Blick and Spectrum Noir, but I really like how Copic markers are refillable and you can replace the nib. Most of mine I have had for about 10 years, and there are a few that need new nibs, and the only color that I have refilled is the colorist blender. But there was a long periods of time that I hadn't used these markers. Michaels also has a selection of alcohol markers that I have heard are great. If you want, I could do a video comparing some alcohol markers to Copics. Let me know in the comments if that is something that would interest you. I wanted to have the image of the bunny cut out, but I don't have the coordinating dies to this stamp set. It's a pretty simple outline, so I fussy cut the image out using the honeybee scissors. I find it's easier to do a rough cut close to the image you want to cut out and then trim off the rest. That way you're not dealing with a lot of excess of paper. I also like to cut right up to the stamp edge. A lot of dies leave a white border around the stamp image. If I have the dies though, I don't worry about the white edge. I use both the honeybee scissors and Tim Holtz scissors for fussy cutting. It just depends on which ones I grab at the time. To finish off the now cut out image, I like to use a black marker to color the edges. If you don't use a marker to do this, you can see the white edge peeking out from the sides. It's not a necessary step, but I like doing it and it's quick. Though sometimes you accidentally mark over the coloring you just did and have to go back through and color the image a little darker to help mask your mistake, like I just did. Off video, I went ahead and used a stitch circle die from Simon Says Stamp. Using my Big Shot, I cut the stitch circle on the panel that we had used the texture paste on, and then lined that up to the card base so that the circles will match. You could skip a layer and just use the texture paste on the A2 card base instead of making 2 layers, but the Nina Storm cardstock I have is 80 pounds to make the card base a little more sturdier. Okay, so here I have a piece of cardstock and Sweet Blush from Paper Tray Ink. I'm using Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide Ink and blending it over the top of the colored cardstock. I haven't used Distress Oxide Inks with colored cardstock in this way before. Oxide inks react with water. Once you spread them with water, they lighten and create a textured effect on your paper. I don't think there is much of a difference in using white or colored cardstock in this way with Distress Oxide inks. At least I didn't see much of a difference with the light pink cardstock that I used. But it's always fun to try something new to see how it may turn out. I would like to experiment with much darker cardstock and a lighter oxide ink to see if there is any difference using the same ink with white cardstock. I'm using my ATG gun to adhere the Distress ink panel to the inside of the card so that just a portion of the oxide ink texture shows through the circle on the front of the card base. You want to adhere that to the inside just below the score line so that your card still folds nicely. If you adhere it too close to the top, it can keep the card from closing fully. While I did my other die cutting off a video earlier, I also die cut this fence die from Lawn Fawn and Nina Solar White cardstock. I'm using that to layer behind the bunny image and help highlight and draw the eye to the main focal point of the card. I also trimmed down the sentiment that was key embossed earlier, and adhered that to the front, overlaying the bottom of the circle just a little. I noticed that the back of the sentiment where I had colored the cardstock with the C7 Copic marker was blotchy, so in order to fix that, I quickly colored the back that shows to smooth it out. I then adhere the bunny so that it looks like it is sitting on top of the sentiment rectangle and adhere it down. I grab the Copic markers again and do some shading underneath the bunny so that it doesn't look like he is floating. Adding that shading helps ground the image. And yes, I realize I have been saying Copic instead of Copic for the pronunciation. Bad habits die hard. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to go to my blog for links to products and the great challenges I have been doing this week. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, like this video, and comment if you would like to see a Copic comparison. See you next time. Bye! Meh, meh.